Good day. The Hydronauts are here to present our mind map discussing the important concepts revolving around population dynamics. Through this figure, we ought to develop our understanding with how populations function. Let's begin with defining what a population is. Population pertains to the group of individuals of a single species inhabiting a specific area at the same time. It has properties that can be studied through demography, it increases through population growth, and it is regulated by density dependent and independent factors. Furthermore, a population can be classified as either semilparous or iteroparous. Semilparous species reproduce once and often die soon after, like insects, while iteroparous species reproduce repeatedly over a period of time, like mammals.
But regardless of similarity or heteroparity, a population will always have four distinct properties, namely behavior, age, sex, and size. Let us run down each of them. Behavior of a certain population can be influenced either by spatial or temporal distribution. Population distribution denotes a spatial pattern due to dispersal of population in a given place. Here, the population's density is the ratio of individuals relative to physical space and shows the relationship between the population and the size of the area in which it lives. Temporal distribution, on the other hand, accounts for the distribution of population in relation to time. Some species, for instance, called nocturnal organisms, are more active at night. Populations may also vary due to changes in temperature, humidity, lunar cycles, and tidal motions over time. Age and sex are also essential factors in describing populations and can be represented through age structures and sex ratios. These visual records make use both of these properties to provide crucial information regarding the population state, and at the same time, who either from males or females would dominate future populations. Age structures, or commonly age-sex structure of a population, is often shown as a population pyramid. The x-axis shows the percentage of the population in each category, with males to the left and females to the right. The y-axis shows the age groups from birth to old age. Such shapes of the diagrams, like the figures shown in this slide, are good indicators of growing, stable, and shrinking populations, favorably among human species. Another property of a population pertains to its size, which can be measured through its abundance, commonality and rarity, and density. The abundance of a population refers to the number of individuals in a given area. In a population where species occur in large numbers, they are more likely to maintain their wide distributions and high abundance. As these populations produce more offspring, chances are high that they reach other areas, expand their geographic range, and increase their numbers. Vice versa, their abundance decreases when such unfavorable conditions affect the population. Commonality and rarity pertains to the occurrence of the species in a population, which can also be a distinguishing factor of their abundance. This can be affected by geographic range, habitat tolerance, and population size that explains their commonality or rarity. For instance, species of dandelions are widely distributed elsewhere, hence a wider geographic range. Their habitat tolerance is quite broad, and they are large in number, as we can notice. Taking all these considerations, this explains their commonness. On the other hand, the rarity of some endangered species in our time, like the tamarao in Mindoro, is also observed and are far different from the factors of those by dandelions: a restricted geography, low habitat tolerance, and very few in number. Four primary demographic factors, namely natality, mortality, immigration, and emigration, also contribute to the population's density, which can affect its expansion and shrinking, and there is an interplay of adding and removing individuals of a population in a certain locality. Both natality and immigration increase population density, with new members entering the population through birth and organisms coming in new areas to reside and populate. On the other hand, mortality and emigration decrease population density as members exit the system they were in. Density of a population also causes biotic or density-dependent factors among organisms that limit the growth of their population. Further discussion will be tackled later on. As these properties are observed, they can be further studied through demography. Demography is simply the science of populations, the study that deals with the vital statistics like size, age structures, and economics of different populations that can be used for a variety of purposes. As mentioned, through the population's demography, there are tools that can be used to describe them. One includes survivorship curves, which basically shows the fraction of the starting group and how their population or survival rate changes as they age. Of course, not all species have linear survivorship curves. We have three types from which we can classify them: the type 1, type 2, and type 3. In type 1 curves, organisms tend to produce fewer offspring but essentially survive in successive ages due to a strong parental care. They tend not to die until their middlehood stages, but only when they become elderly. We humans and other primates exhibit this curve. Type 2 curves are linear in shape, and organisms die more or less equally at each age interval, hence a constant rate of decline. Like those under type 1 curve, offspring are relatively few, but significant parental care enables them to survive. An example of these organisms are birds. Meanwhile, type 3 curves are what trees, marine invertebrates, and fishes' lifetime mostly exhibit. During birth, many offspring are produced, but only few survive as early as their younger years. This explains no parental care is involved to sustain their survival. Through time, only a number of these species survive to mature, hence the survivorship rate is too low as they age. These curves are simplified graphical presentations of the elements found in the life table, which is the next thing we will discuss. Life tables analyze survivability and mortality of these individuals and are records of their life and death and how likely they are to survive, die, or reproduce at different stages of their lives. To simply put it together, it shows the probability of a population or species that they will survive in the incoming years. This is usually important, let's say, for ecologists to determine ages of wildlife species that are most vulnerable to extinction. These properties influence and affect the growth rate of the population, whether favorable environmental conditions enable them to maximize their biotic potential or their capacity to reproduce or not, which would eventually aid in their population size to increase or decrease.
If the size of the population increases, its growth can be measured by the population growth rate using this formula. dn over dt, which is the population growth rate represented by the change in number per unit time, is equal to the product of r and n, wherein r refers to the increase in number per individual and n represents the current number of individuals. This equation can also be modified to depict the two distinct patterns of population growth called exponential growth and logistic growth. Exponential growth depicts how a population would grow without biotic and abiotic factors that would limit its growth. In this scenario, a population would grow endlessly, resulting in a graph with a J-shaped curve. Additionally, our strategists, like dandelions, typically exhibit exponential growth as they have a shorter lifespan, they produce many offspring, and they are usually smaller in size. Logistic growth, on the other hand, depicts how a population would grow in a more realistic situation wherein resources get depleted and the population is affected by biotic and abiotic factors. These factors include availability of raw materials, energy, and space, and the accumulation and disposal of waste, as well as interactions among organisms. As such, this growth results in a graph with an S-shaped curve. Here we see that the population eventually stops growing. The point at which the population plateaus is called the carrying capacity of the environment. This refers to the maximum population that specific environment can support. Lastly, case strategists, like human beings, typically exhibit logistic growth as they have longer lifespans, produce few offspring, and are usually larger in size.
Even though the population of the organisms in the earth is massive, it doesn't just grow over time. There are some times that the population decreases or stabilizes. This is what we call population regulation. When it comes to population regulation, the limiting factors determine the carrying capacity. There are two factors that we have to consider, the density dependent and the density independent. Density-dependent factors are mostly biotic factors that regulate the population. It relies on density for the effects of it to be observed, hence the name density-dependent. Effects of these factors intensifies, meaning the bigger the population, the more damaging and observable the effects of these factors. Examples of these factors are competition, predation, and diseases or parasitism. With diseases the most common and observable regulation factor on humans, like the virus we're fighting right now, COVID-19, with the current death toll of roughly 6.38 million for the past 2 years, the COVID-19 virus is one of the immense and observable regulations to the human population. On the other hand, predation and competition is most likely observed in animals and works hand in hand with each other. With the population increasing, the competition for the hunt of food intensifies, which plays a role in depleting the population of prey because of the increased predation. Moving on, density-independent factors are abiotic factors that exert the same influence or effect on the population regardless of its density, hence the name density-independent. Examples of these factors are the planet's natural disasters, with avalanches affecting the population in the poles like penguins, typhoons striking the both plant and human population, and as well as earthquakes in certain areas like the Pacific Ring of Fire.